Jake Martinez wiped the sweat from his forehead as he stared at the blinking red light on his control panel. The distress beacon was weak, barely strong enough to reach his ship. Most people would ignore it. The outer rim was full of old signals, from dead ships and broken equipment. But something about this one felt different. He sat back in his pilot chair and looked out at the stars. Jake had been working as a salvage operator for 8 years now. He flew alone in his ship, called the Wanderer, looking for wrecked ships and abandoned cargo. It was not easy work, but it paid well enough to keep him fed and his ship running. The beacon was coming from a planet called Zirion Prime. Jake knew about this world. It was mostly desert with 2 bright suns that made the surface hot enough to cook a man alive. Nobody lived there. Nobody wanted to live there. So why was someone sending a distress signal from such a terrible place? Jake checked his fuel levels and supplies. He had enough to make the trip and still get back to the nearest station. The smart thing would be to report the signal to the Colonial Administration and let them handle it. That was the rule, but Jake had never been good at following rules. "Well, Wanderer," he said to his ship, "looks like we are taking another detour." He set course for Zirion Prime and settled in for the 3-day journey. As his ship jumped through hyperspace, Jake could not shake the feeling that this signal was important. He had learned to trust his gut over the years. It had kept him alive when pirates tried to rob him and when faulty equipment nearly killed him in deep space. When the Wanderer dropped out of hyperspace near Zirion Prime, Jake felt the heat right away. Even in space, the twin suns made his ship's cooling systems work harder. The planet below looked like a ball of red sand, with no water or green plants anywhere. The distress beacon was stronger now. Jake followed it down to the planet's surface, his ship shaking as it entered the thick, hot atmosphere. He had to be careful. One mistake and the heat would fry his engines. Jake landed his ship on a flat area between 2 large sand dunes. When he opened his ship's door, the heat hit him like a physical blow. Even with his environmental suit on, he could feel how hot it was outside. The temperature reading on his suit showed numbers that made him whistle in surprise. He grabbed his toolkit and started walking toward where the beacon signal was strongest. The sand was deep and made walking hard. Each step sank down into the red powder. The twin suns hung in the sky like angry eyes, beating down on him without mercy. After walking for an hour, Jake saw something in the distance. It looked like metal, half buried in a sand dune. As he got closer, he could see it was some kind of escape pod or small ship. The hull was black and smooth, with strange markings he did not recognize. Jake walked around the crashed vessel, looking for a way inside. The metal was still hot from sitting in the desert sun. He found what looked like a door, but it was stuck shut. Using a tool from his kit, he managed to force it open. The smell hit him first. It was the smell of fear and death and things left to rot in the heat. Jake covered his nose and stepped inside the small space. Emergency lights flickered on and off, casting strange shadows on the walls. The inside of the pod was a mess. Equipment was scattered everywhere. Food containers were empty and thrown around like someone had left in a great hurry. But what caught Jake's attention were the markings on the walls. He had seen these symbols before, in reports from the Colonial Administration. They belonged to the Veil-3 Empire. Jake knew about the Veil-3. Everyone in the Outer Rim did. They were tall, cruel aliens who traded in slaves and conquered weaker worlds. They were known for their violence and their complete lack of mercy. Finding a Veil-3 pod on this empty planet made Jake very nervous. Then he heard it. A soft sound, barely louder than a whisper. It sounded like breathing, but weak and slow. Jake followed the sound to the back of the pod, where he found 2 small carrying cases that had been pushed against the wall. The first case was empty. But the second one made Jake's heart stop. Inside were two small creatures, no bigger than house cats. They looked like tiny dragons, with scales that should have been bright, but were now dull from lack of water. Their breathing was so slow that Jake thought they might already be dead. One of the creatures had silver-blue scales that reminded Jake of starlight. The other had scales the color of deep amber, like precious stones. Both of them were so thin that Jake could see their ribs under their scales. Their eyes were closed, but occasionally one would twitch or make a small sound. Jake looked around the pod again and understood what had happened. Someone had put these creatures in here and left them to die. The empty food containers, the scattered equipment, the way the carrying cases had been shoved against the wall, it all told the same story. These little dragons had been abandoned here to die slowly in the heat. Jake felt anger rise in his chest. He had seen many cruel things in his years, working the outer rim, but leaving helpless creatures to die, this made him sick. Without thinking, he carefully lifted both creatures from their case. They were so light and felt so fragile in his hands. The silver-blue one opened its eyes for a moment and looked at Jake. Those eyes held intelligence and pain, and something that looked like hope. Then the eyes closed again as the creature went back to its slow, dying breathing. Jake made his decision right then. He did not know what these creatures were, or why someone had left them here. He did not know if they were dangerous or valuable, or just animals. All he knew was that they were dying, and he could not walk away from that. He wrapped both creatures carefully in his jacket and carried them back to his ship. The walk through the desert seemed to take forever. The heat was getting worse as both suns moved higher in the sky. Jake's suit was working at its limit to keep him alive. When he finally reached the Wanderer, Jake brought the creatures inside and laid them on his bunk. He turned up the air conditioning and got water and food from his supplies. He had no idea what these dragon-like creatures ate, but he had to try something. As Jake worked to save the dying creatures, he wondered what he had gotten himself into. Finding anything connected to the Vel-3 Empire was dangerous. These creatures might be valuable slaves or weapons or worse. But as he looked at their peaceful faces and felt how trust they showed even in their weakness, Jake knew he had made the right choice. He would save them if he could. The rest he would figure out later. Jake spent the first 3 days thinking the little dragons would die. They barely moved and ate almost nothing. He tried giving them water drop by drop with a small spoon. Sometimes they would swallow. Sometimes the water just ran out of their mouths. On the 4th day, the silver-blue one opened its eyes and looked at Jake for a long time. Jake was sitting next to his bunk, where he had made a soft bed for both creatures. He had been reading to them from an old book, thinking that maybe hearing a voice would help them want to live. "Hey there, little one," Jake said softly. "Are you feeling better?" The creature made a small chirping sound and tried to lift its head. Jake helped by putting his hand under its neck for support. For the first time, the dragon-like creature drank water on its own. "That's good," Jake said. "Keep drinking. You need to get strong." Over the next week, both creatures slowly got better. Jake started calling them Nova and Ember because of their scale colors. Nova was the silver-blue one who had opened its eyes first. Ember was the amber-colored one who was smaller and seemed more afraid. Jake learned by watching them carefully. They could eat the protein bars from his emergency supplies if he broke them into small pieces. They liked warm water better than cold. They slept curled up together, and they always stayed close to each other. The most surprising thing Jake discovered was how smart they were. Nova and Ember were not just animals. They watched everything Jake did with great interest. When he worked on fixing equipment, they would sit nearby and follow his movements with their eyes. When he talked to them, they would tilt their heads like they were trying to understand every word. By the end of the second week, both dragons were strong enough to walk around Jake's small ship. They explored every corner, always staying together. Jake noticed they were very careful not to touch anything important or break anything. It was like they understood that the ship was keeping them alive. And something strange started happening. Jake began having dreams that were not his own. In these dreams, he saw things from very low to the ground, like he was looking through the eyes of something small. He saw huge alien creatures with dark skin and cruel faces. He felt terror and sadness that was so strong it woke him up. Jake realized the dreams were coming from Nova and Ember. Somehow, they were sharing their memories with him while he slept. The images were fuzzy and came in pieces, but Jake could understand the story they told. The dragons had lived in a place with many others like them. But they were not free. They were kept in cages and forced to do things they did not want to do. The cruel aliens, the Velthri, used them like tools or weapons. Nova and Ember had been very young when this happened. One day, a huge Velthri warrior had grabbed Nova and Ember and thrown them into the escape pod. Jake could feel the fear and confusion in the memory. The dragons had not understood why they were being taken away from the others. They only knew they were scared and alone. Jake woke up from these dreams feeling angry and sad. No creature should be treated like that, especially not young ones who had done nothing wrong. He looked at Nova and Ember sleeping peacefully on his bunk and made a promise to himself. He would protect them no matter what. As the days passed, Jake began to understand that Nova and Ember could communicate in ways he had never seen before. They did not just make sounds like chirps and clicks. They could also put feelings and simple pictures directly into his mind when they were touching him. When Nova wanted food, Jake would suddenly feel hungry and see an image of the protein bars. When Ember was scared of a loud noise from the ship's engine, Jake would feel that fear and know exactly what was wrong. It was like they could speak without words. Jake also noticed that the dragons were growing. They were still small, but they were definitely bigger than when he had found them. Their scales were becoming brighter and more beautiful. Nova's silver-blue scales now had a shine like metal, and Ember's amber scales seemed to glow with their own light. 3 weeks after rescuing them, Jake's peaceful routine was broken. His ship's alarm went off, warning him that another vessel was approaching. Jake looked at his scanner and felt his heart sink. It was a Velthri patrol ship, much bigger and more dangerous than the Wanderer. Jake quickly grabbed Nova and Ember and put them in a hidden compartment he had built for smuggling valuable items. It was cramped but safe, and he had put soft blankets inside to make it comfortable. "Stay quiet, both of you," he whispered. "Do not make any sounds no matter what happens." Nova and Ember seemed to understand the danger. They pressed themselves against each other in the small space and looked at Jake with trust in their eyes. Jake closed the compartment just as his communication system came to life. A voice that came through the speakers was deep and harsh. Jake had heard Velthri speak before, but this one sounded more dangerous than most. "Human vessel, this is Commander Kazeth of the Velthri Empire. You will prepare to be boarded for inspection." Jake tried to keep his voice steady as he replied. "This is Jake Martinez aboard the salvage ship Wanderer. I am operating under legal salvage rights in neutral space. What is the reason for this inspection?" "We are searching for stolen property," Kazeth replied. "2 valuable assets were taken from one of our facilities. Our tracking shows they may be in this area." Jake's hands were shaking as he prepared his ship for boarding. He knew Kazeth was talking about Nova and Ember. The dragons had not been abandoned. They were escapees, and the Velthri wanted them back. When the airlock opened, 3 Velthri soldiers came aboard Jake's ship. They were tall and powerful, with dark skin that looked like leather armor. Their faces were cruel, and their eyes were cold. Commander Kazeth was the largest of them, with scars across his face that told of many battles. "Search everything," Kazeth ordered his soldiers. "The assets are small and clever. They may be hiding anywhere." Jake watched as the aliens tore through his ship, throwing his belongings around and checking every possible hiding place. His heart pounded as they got closer to the secret compartment. But Jake had built it well, and even careful searching did not reveal a dot. After an hour, the soldiers had found nothing. Kazeth stared at Jake with suspicious eyes. "You have been in the Zerion system recently," Kazeth said. It was not a question. "I do salvage work," Jake replied. "I check distress beacons and look for valuable scrap. There was a signal from that system, but I only found some old wreckage." Kazeth stepped closer to Jake, close enough that Jake could smell the alien's terrible breath. "Listen carefully, human," Kazeth said. "The property we seek is extremely valuable to the Empire. Anyone found harboring these assets will face immediate execution. If you encounter them, you will contact us immediately." "I understand," Jake said. Before leaving, Kazeth looked around Jake's ship one more time. His eyes seemed to look right through Jake. "We will be watching, human. Do not think you can hide anything from the Empire." After the Val 3 left, Jake waited a full hour before opening the secret compartment. Nova and Ember crawled out slowly, both of them shaking with fear. They had heard everything and understood that they were in great danger. Jake sat on the floor and let both dragons climb into his lap. He could feel their fear through their mental connection, but he could also feel something else, complete trust in him. Despite everything they had suffered, despite the danger they were all in now, Nova and Ember believed that Jake would keep them safe. "I will not let them take you," Jake promised, stroking their scales gently. "We will figure this out together." But even as he made the promise, Jake wondered how he could possibly keep it. The Veil 3 Empire was vast and powerful. He was just one man with a small ship. How could he protect 2 small dragons from an entire alien military force? The answer would have to wait. For now, all Jake could do was love them and hope that would be enough. Word traveled fast in the Outer Rim. Within days of the Val 3 inspection, Jake started hearing rumors at space stations and trading posts. People whispered about a big reward for information, about a human salvage operator who might be hiding something valuable. The Veil 3 were offering enough money to buy a small moon. Jake knew he was in trouble. Every bounty hunter, pirate, and desperate person in the galaxy would be looking for him now. He could not stay in one place for long, and he could not trust anyone. Nova and Ember were growing faster now. They were already twice the size they had been when Jake found them. Their scales were becoming more beautiful each day, and their eyes held more intelligence than any animal Jake had ever seen. They seemed to understand that they were the reason for all the danger. The first attack came near the mining colony of New Denver. Jake was trying to buy supplies when 3 bounty hunters cornered him at the fuel station. They were rough-looking humans with more weapons than sense. "Jake Martinez," the leader said, "we hear you have something that belongs to the Veil 3. Hand it over, and we will split the reward with you." Jake kept his hands visible and spoke calmly. "I do not know what you are talking about." "Do not play games," another bounty hunter said. "Everyone knows you picked up something valuable. The whole sector is buzzing about it." Jake noticed more people gathering around them. Some were probably more bounty hunters. Others were just curious. But all of them looked dangerous. "I think there has been a mistake," Jake said. "I am just a salvage operator. I do not have anything valuable." The leader pulled out a large gun. "We are going to search your ship. If you cooperate, you might live through this." Jake was outnumbered and outgunned, but he had one advantage. Nova and Ember were hidden in the secret compartment, and they had been listening to everything through their mental connection with Jake. They knew he was in danger. Suddenly, all the lights at the fuel station went out. In the darkness, Jake heard the bounty hunters shouting and stumbling around. Emergency lighting came on after a few seconds, but it was dim and cast strange shadows everywhere. Jake used the confusion to escape. He ran to his ship and took off as fast as he could. Once he was safely in space, he opened the secret compartment to check on Nova and Ember. "Did you two cause those lights to go out?" he asked. Nova made a chirping sound that Jake had learned. Meant yes. Ember pressed against Jake's leg and shared an image through their mental connection. Jake saw the fuel station's electrical system through Ember's eyes, and he understood that the dragons had somehow interfered with it. "You can affect machines?" Jake asked in amazement. Both dragons looked at him with what Jake could only describe as pride. They had used their abilities to save him, and they were happy about it. But Jake's relief did not last long. Over the next few weeks, the attacks became more frequent and dangerous. Veil 3 death squads joined the hunt, bringing military-grade weapons and ships. Jake found himself running from system to system, never staying anywhere for more than a few hours. The stress was taking its toll on all of them. Jake was exhausted from constantly running and hiding. Nova and Ember were growing restless in the cramped ship. They needed space to move around, but it was too dangerous to let them out. Everything changed during a battle near the asteroid fields of Kepler Station. Jake was being chased by 2 Val 3 fighters when his ship's engine was hit by enemy fire. The Wanderer started losing power and spinning out of control. Jake fought to regain control of his ship, but the damage was too severe. He was going to crash into one of the asteroids, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Through the mental connection, he felt Nova and Ember's fear and his own despair, and something incredible happened. Both dragons broke out of their hiding place and came to the cockpit. They placed their small paws on Jake's hands as he gripped the controls. Suddenly, Jake could feel power flowing through him. Not his own power, but something much stronger. The ship's damaged systems suddenly came back online. The engines roared to life with more power than they had ever had before. Jake was able to pull the Wanderer out of its death spiral and escape the asteroid field. One of the Veil 3 fighters tried to follow, but Nova and Ember looked at it through the ship's window. The enemy fighters suddenly stopped working and drifted helplessly in space. Jake stared at the 2 dragons in shock. "What are you?" Before Nova or Ember could answer, Jake's communication system crackled to life. But this time, the voice was not from an enemy. It was weak and filled with pain. "Human vessel," the voice said. "This is Flight Leader Vex of the Val 3 Empire. My ship is damaged and my life support is failing. I request assistance." Jake looked at his scanner and saw a small Val 3 fighter drifting nearby. Its engines were dead, and its hull was breached in several places. The pilot inside was probably dying. The smart thing would be to ignore the distress call. This was a Veil 3 pilot, one of the aliens who had been hunting Jake for weeks. Helping him would be dangerous and stupid, but Jake had never been able to ignore someone in need. Against all logic, he brought the damaged fighter into his ship's cargo bay and extracted the dying pilot. Flight Leader Vex was younger than the other Veil 3 Jake had seen. His dark skin was pale from blood loss, and his breathing was shallow. Jake used his medical supplies to treat the alien's wounds, while Nova and Ember watched from a safe distance. As Jake worked to save his enemy's life, Vex stared at him in confusion. "Why?" Vex whispered. "Why do you help me?" "I was sent to capture you because you are hurt," Jake said simply. "I cannot watch someone die if I can help it." Vex's eyes moved to Nova and Ember, and Jake saw recognition there. "The Lost Ones," Vex said. "You are the human who saved the Lost Ones." "Lost Ones?" Jake asked. Vex was quiet for a long time. Jake thought the alien had died, But then Vex spoke again, his voice so soft Jake had to lean closer to hear. They are not just animals, Vex said. They are Draknari, the last of the Dragon Kings. Jake felt his heart stop. Dragon Kings? Long ago, Vex continued, the Draknari ruled a great empire among the stars. They were wise and powerful, with abilities your kind cannot imagine. But we Velthri conquered them. We made them slaves. We used their power for our own purposes. Vex coughed, and Jake saw blood on the alien's lips. Those two, Vex said, looking at Nova and Ember. They are royal blood. The last children of the last Draknari emperor. They were supposed to die because they remembered too much. They remembered freedom. Jake looked at Nova and Ember with new understanding. They were not just intelligent animals. They were the last. Members of a species that had once ruled the stars. There are others, Vex whispered. Other Draknari who escaped over the years. They hide on a world called Sanctuary. If you can find them, if you can bring the royal children to them, they might have a chance to be free again. Vex reached into his uniform and pulled out a small device. Coordinates, he said, handing it to Jake. The location of Sanctuary. I give this to you because you showed mercy to an enemy. I have never seen such a thing before. Why? Are you helping me? Jake asked. Because, Vex said, I am tired of being part of something that destroys hope. Maybe it is time for hope to win. Flight Leader Vex died a few minutes later. Jake closed the alien's eyes and said a quiet prayer for him. Then he looked at the coordinates Vex had given him. Nova and Ember came closer, and Jake felt their emotions. Through the mental connection, they were excited and scared at the same time. The idea of finding others like them filled them with hope, but they also feared it might be a trap. Jake made his decision. He had come this far, protecting these amazing creatures. He would not give up now. All right, you two, he said to Nova and Ember. Let us go find your people. As the Wanderer changed course toward the coordinates Vex had provided, Jake realized that his simple act of rescuing two dying creatures had become something much bigger. He was no longer just trying to protect Nova and Ember. He was trying to help restore an entire civilization. The thought was terrifying and exciting at the same time. Jake Martinez, a simple salvage operator, was about to become part of something that could change the galaxy forever. The journey to Sanctuary took 2 weeks. Jake followed the coordinates that the dying Velthri pilot had given him, but finding the hidden world was not easy. The location led to what appeared to be empty space with no planets or stars nearby. Nova and Ember had grown even larger during the journey. They were now the size of large dogs, and their scales had become so bright they seemed to glow with inner light. More importantly, their mental abilities had grown stronger. Jake could now communicate with them almost as clearly as if they were speaking out loud. Are you sure this is the right place? Jake asked them as he stared at the empty space on his scanner. Nova shared an image with him, a feeling of something hidden but nearby. Ember added her own sensation, like a warm presence just out of sight. Both dragons seemed certain they were in the right place, even though Jake could see nothing. Then Nova did something new. She placed her paw on the ship's control panel and closed her eyes. Jake felt power flowing through the ship's systems, but this time it was different. Instead of affecting machines, Nova was using the ship's sensors to look for something that normal technology could not detect. Suddenly, Jake's scanner lit up with new information. A planet appeared where there had been empty space before. It was beautiful, with blue oceans and green continents, but it was somehow invisible to normal sensors. Incredible, Jake whispered. They have been hiding it with some kind of advanced technology. As the Wanderer approached the planet, Jake received a communication signal unlike anything he had ever heard. It was not just sound. It was a mixture of voices and music and emotions all combined into something that made his heart feel peaceful. "Welcome, Dragon Father," the voice said in perfect English. "We have been waiting for you." "Dragon Father?" Jake asked, confused. "That is what we call you," the voice replied. "You saved the royal children when no one else would. You protected them and loved them when they had nothing. In our culture, this makes you their father by choice, which is stronger than family." By blood, Jake felt tears in his eyes. He had never thought of himself as Nova and Ember's father, but the title felt right somehow. "I am called Celestin the Wise," the voice continued. "I am the eldest of the Draknari who live on Sanctuary. Please bring the young ones home." Jake landed his ship in a beautiful valley filled with crystal formations and flowing streams. As he opened the ship's door, Nova and Ember rushed past him with excited chirps and calls. They had never seen such a beautiful place, and they could sense others of their kind nearby. Jake followed them out of the ship and stopped in amazement. Adult Draknari were emerging from hidden places among the crystals and trees. They were magnificent creatures, much larger than Nova and Ember, with scales that shimmered like jewels and eyes that held ancient wisdom. The largest of them approached Jake slowly. She was easily 12 feet long, with silver scales that seemed to contain tiny stars. Her presence filled Jake with a sense of peace and safety he had never felt before. "I am Celestin," she said, speaking directly into Jake's mind. "And you are the miracle we had given up hoping for." Jake looked around at the other adult Draknari. There were maybe 20 of them, all beautiful and powerful, but he could see sadness in their eyes. "We are all that remains," Celestin explained. "For 300 years, we have hidden here while our people suffer as slaves throughout the galaxy. We had accepted that our race would die with us." Nova and Ember were playing with some of the younger adult Draknari, and Jake could feel their joy through the mental connection. They had never known others of their kind before, and the experience was overwhelming for them. "But these two," Celestin continued, "they are of the royal bloodline, the last children of Emperor Drakmor the Great. With them alive and free, we have hope again." "What kind of hope?" Jake asked. Celestin gestured for Jake to follow her to a higher part of the valley. From there, he could see the entire settlement, beautiful buildings that seemed to grow from the living rock, gardens that floated in the air, and technology that looked like art. The Draknari were once the greatest civilization in the galaxy. Celestin said, "We had the power to shape matter with our thoughts, to communicate across vast distances, and to build wonders that lasted for thousands of years. But our greatest achievement was our wisdom. We ruled not through fear, but through understanding and compassion." Jake watched Nova and Ember playing below and saw how the adult Draknari treated them with such love and care. "The Veil Three conquered. US because we refused to fight back," Celestin continued. "We believed that violence was never the answer to conflict. We were wrong. Sometimes good people must fight to protect those who cannot protect themselves. So what happens now?" Jake asked. Celestin's expression became serious. "Now we face a choice that will determine the fate of our entire species. We can continue to hide here safely until we eventually die out, or we can make a stand that might free our enslaved brothers and sisters, but will probably result in our destruction." Jake felt a chill run through him. "The Veil Three found us before. It will find us again." "Yes," Celestin agreed. "Even now, they are gathering a great fleet to destroy Sanctuary once and for all. Our long hiding is about to end." Over the next few days, Jake learned more about the Draknari and their terrible situation. Throughout the galaxy, thousands of their people were held as slaves by the Valthri Empire. They were used as living computers, forced to power starships with their mental abilities, and treated as tools rather than living beings. The adult Draknari Sanctuary were powerful, but they were also few in number. Even with their advanced technology and mental abilities, they could not hope to defeat the massive Valkyrie fleet that was coming for them. But Jake also learned something that changed everything. Nova and Ember were not just royal blood. They were the key to awakening the full power of the Draknari species. Their bloodline carried genetic memories that went back thousands of years, including knowledge of abilities that had been forgotten. There is a ritual, Celestin explained to Jake as they watched Nova and Ember playing with the other young Draknari. A bonding ceremony that can link a Draknari to another being permanently. It has never been attempted with a non-Draknari before, but we believe it might be possible. What would that do? Jake asked. It would make you truly one of us, Celestin said. You would share in our abilities and our knowledge. More importantly, Nova and Ember's trust in you would become a bridge that could connect all Draknari everywhere. Jake felt scared and honored at the same time. That sounds dangerous. It is, Celestin admitted. A bonding might kill you. Even if it succeeds, you would no longer be fully human. You would be something new, a bridge between our species. Jake looked at Nova and Ember, who had grown so much since he first found them dying in the desert. They had become the most important thing in his life, and he could not imagine living without them. When do we start? He asked. The bonding ritual took place 3 days later, just as the Valkyrie fleet arrived at the edge of the star system. Jake lay on a bed of living crystal, while Nova and Ember placed their paws on his chest. The other adult Draknari formed. A circle around them, their combined mental power creating a sphere of pure energy. Jake felt his consciousness expand beyond his human limitations. Suddenly, he could sense every living thing on the planet. He could feel the approaching Valkyrie, ships like points of darkness against the stars. Most incredibly, he could sense the enslaved Draknari throughout the galaxy, their pain and hopelessness flowing through him like a river of sorrow. But he also felt something else, the incredible love and loyalty that Nova and Ember had for him. Their trust in him had never wavered, even when he had doubted himself. That trust became a beacon that reached out to every Draknari in the galaxy. When the ritual was complete, Jake was no longer just human. He was something new, a being who could bridge the gap between species and carry hope to those who had given up on it. Celestin helped him sit up, and Jake saw that his appearance had changed. His eyes now held the same inner light as the Draknari, and his skin had a faint luminescence. How do you feel? Celestin asked. Jake reached out with his new senses and felt the vast network of enslaved Draknari throughout the galaxy. But now, instead of just sensing their pain, he could offer them something they had not felt in centuries: hope. I feel like I can carry a message, Jake said. A message that freedom is possible. Then you are ready, Celestin said, because the final battle is about to begin. Through the great windows of the crystal chamber, Jake could see the Valkyrie fleet approaching Sanctuary. Hundreds of ships filled the sky, led by the massive dreadnought that he recognized as Commander Kazeth's flagship. Nova and Ember stood beside him, no longer the small, dying creatures he had found in the desert. They were magnificent young Draknari, their royal heritage shining in every scale, and their loyalty to Jake stronger than ever. The time for hiding was over. The time for hope had begun. The Valkyrie fleet filled the sky above Sanctuary like a swarm of metal insects. Jake counted over 300 ships, from small fighters to massive cruisers. At the center of the fleet was the largest ship he had ever seen, a dreadnought, called Oblivion's Edge, that was easily 5 miles long. Commander Kazeth's voice boomed across all communication channels, filled with rage and hatred. Draknari cowards, Kazeth announced. Your long hiding ends today? Surrender the royal bloodline and the human who stole them, and we will make your deaths quick. Resist, and we will make you suffer as your ancestors suffered. Jake stood with Nova and Ember on the highest crystal platform in the valley. Around them, the 20 adult Draknari prepared for battle with calm determination. They knew they were outnumbered and outgunned, but they also knew this was their last chance to save their people. "Are you ready?" Celestin asked Jake through their mental connection. Jake nodded, feeling the power of the bonding ritual flowing through him. He could sense every Draknari on Sanctuary, and more importantly, he could reach out to the enslaved Draknari in the Val-3 fleet above them. "Nova, Ember," Jake said to his two companions, "it is time to show the galaxy what hope looks like." The first attack came without warning. Val-3 fighters screamed down from orbit, firing energy weapons that could melt rock. But the Draknari were ready. They raised their minds together and created a shield of pure mental energy that turned aside the enemy fire. Jake watched in amazement as the adult Draknari fought back. They did not use weapons in the traditional sense. Instead, they reached out with their thoughts and simply stopped the enemy ships from working. Fighters fell from the sky as their engines died. Weapon systems failed at the moment they tried to fire, but there were too many enemies. For every ship the Draknari disabled, 2 more took its place. Slowly, the mental shield around Sanctuary began to weaken. "We cannot hold them much longer," Celestin said, strain showing in her voice. That was when Jake realized what he had to do. The bonding ritual had not just given him Draknari abilities. It had made him a bridge between his human nature and their ancient wisdom. He had something that neither species possessed alone. "I have an idea," Jake told Nova and Ember. "But I need you to trust me completely." Both young Draknari pressed against his sides, sharing their absolute faith in him through the mental connection. Jake reached out with his enhanced senses. But instead of focusing on the enemy ships, he searched for the enslaved Draknari hidden within them. The Val-3 used captured Draknari as living components in their technology, forcing them to power weapons and engines with their mental abilities. Jake found them. Hundreds of enslaved Draknari spread throughout the enemy fleet. They had been prisoners for so long that many had forgotten they were once free. But Jake carried something they had never felt before, the love and trust that Nova and Ember had shown him. Using the bond he shared with the 2 young royals, Jake projected that feeling of unconditional love across the entire fleet. It was not a Draknari technique or a human strategy. It was something entirely new, born from the connection between 2 different species. The effect was immediate and stunning. Throughout the Val-3 fleet, enslaved Draknari began to remember what freedom felt like. They remembered that they were not tools or weapons, but living beings with their own thoughts and dreams. One by one, they began to resist their captors. The bridge of a Val-3 cruiser, the enslaved Draknari who powered the navigation system, suddenly refused to obey commands. The ship began to drift helplessly in space, in the weapon bays of another ship. The Draknari, forced to aim the guns, turned them toward other Val-3 vessels instead of Sanctuary. Aboard Oblivion's Edge, the dozens of enslaved Draknari who powered the massive dreadnought systems all acted at once, shutting down the ship's engines and weapons. Commander Kaziath's voice filled the communication channels again, but this time it was filled with panic instead of confidence. "What is happening?" Kaziath demanded. "Why are the systems failing?" Jake smiled as he felt the wave of rebellion spreading through the enemy fleet. Nova and Ember had grown to their full young adult size during the battle, their scales blazing with inner fire as they channeled their royal power through Jake to their enslaved kin. "Because," Jake said, broadcasting his voice to every ship in the fleet, "they remember what it means to be free." The Val-3 fleet began to tear itself apart from within. Ships that had been allies moments before now turned their weapons on each other as freed Draknari took control. Explosions lit up the sky as vessels collided or destroyed each other in the chaos. But Commander Kazeth was not finished. Jake watched as the massive dreadnought's emergency systems came online, bypassing the sabotaged Draknari-powered technology. Oblivion's Edge began moving toward Sanctuary again, its backup weapons charging for a final devastating attack. The human did this. Kazeth's voice boomed across space. He turned our own slaves against us. I will kill him with my own hands. Jake knew what he had to do. He looked at Nova and Ember, both of them magnificent young dragons with scales that shone like stars. I have to go up there, he told them. I have to stop Kazeth before he destroys Sanctuary. We go together, Nova said, her mental voice clear and strong. Always together, Ember added, her amber eyes blazing with determination. Jake and the two young Draknari used their combined abilities to transport themselves directly onto Oblivion's Edge. They appeared on the bridge of the massive ship in Nice, a flash of silver and gold light startling the Vel-3 crew. Commander Kazeth stood in the center of the bridge, even larger and more terrifying than Jake remembered. The alien commander's scarred face twisted with rage when he saw Jake. So, Kazeth snarled, the human who thinks he can steal from the Empire has come to me. Good. I will enjoy killing you slowly. Jake felt fear, but he also felt the unwavering support of Nova and Ember beside him. The three of them had been through so much together, from that first desperate day in the desert to this final confrontation among the stars. I did not steal anything, Jake said calmly. I saved 2 lives. There is a difference. Kazeth pulled out a massive weapon and aimed it at Jake. You turned our property against us. You cost the Empire hundreds of ships and thousands of slaves. For this you will suffer. They were never your property, Jake replied. They are living beings with thoughts and feelings and dreams. You enslaved them, but you could never own them. The battle that followed was unlike anything Jake could have imagined. Kazeth was physically much stronger than any human, but Jake was no longer just human. The bonding with Nova and Ember had given him abilities he was still learning to use. When Kazeth swung his weapon, Jake dodged with speed that surprised even himself. When the alien commander tried to grab him, Jake slipped away like water. Most importantly, Jake was not fighting alone. Nova and Ember fought beside him, their young dragon forms darting around the bridge and using their mental powers to confuse and disorient their enemy. But the real battle was not physical. As Jake fought Kazeth, he was also broadcasting the story of hope to every enslaved Draknari in the galaxy. Through the mental network that connected all of their kind, Jake shared the tale of 2 small dragons who had been left to die but chose to live, and of a human who had risked everything to save them. A story spread like wildfire through the Draknari consciousness. On planets throughout the galaxy, enslaved Draknari began to rise up against their captors. They had been given something more powerful than weapons or technology. They had been given hope. Kazeth realized what was happening and roared with fury. He grabbed Jake and lifted him off the ground with one massive hand. You think your compassion makes you strong? Kazeth snarled. I will show you the price of weakness. But as Kazeth prepared to crush Jake, something unexpected happened. Nova and Ember placed their paws on Jake's shoulders, and suddenly all 3 of them were connected. Not just mentally, but spiritually. Jake felt the full power of the royal Draknari bloodline flowing through him, combined with his own human determination to protect those he loved. The energy that erupted from their bond filled the entire bridge with blazing light. Kazeth screamed and dropped Jake, his dark skin burning from the pure force of love and hope made manifest. This is impossible, Kazeth gasped. No one can defeat the Empire. We are too strong. Jake stood up, supported by Nova and Ember on either side. His eyes blazed with the same inner light as theirs. "You are not strong," Jake said. "You are just cruel. And cruelty always loses to love in the end." Kazeth made one final desperate attack, but the combined power of Jake, Nova, and Ember simply absorbed his violence and turned it into more hope. The alien commander collapsed, defeated not by superior force, but by the simple truth that love is stronger than hate. With their leader fallen, the remaining Val 3 forces surrendered or fled. The liberated Draknari throughout the fleet began to sing, a sound that carried across space and reached their enslaved kin on distant worlds. The revolution had begun. In the months that followed, the Val 3 Empire crumbled as enslaved Draknari across the galaxy rose up and claimed their freedom. They were led by the story of Jake Martinez, the human who had saved 2 dragon cubs and changed the fate of entire civilizations. Jake became known throughout the galaxy as the Dra,